Good morning, you guys. Today I just want to chat about my insane January so far and how that has been affecting my reading. Timestamps below so you can skip to whatever part of this might be most interesting to you. But just generally to start January, I knew it would be a lot because I had significant deadlines for the middle of the month. And then I have another coming up for the very beginning of February. And that's the type of deadline where my heart is picking up just mentioning it. It's very, very important to me. So far, this whole month has been go time. And I've been ruthlessly prioritizing certain things over everything else, which makes sense, right? But when you get to the point where anything in your life that comes up, you're thinking, okay, I'll deal with you later. At a certain point, later arrives. I don't know about you, but I tend to imagine how I'm going to feel in certain circumstances. So, for example, when I hit this deadline, I'm going to feel incredibly relieved. And I'm just going to lie back on my couch, boneless. I'm going to sleep in. It's all going to feel so relaxing. When what has really happened is that I'm suddenly looking around at the wreckage of my life, thinking, how did my desk drawers get this way? My front hall closet is its own circle of hell. When was the last time I Windexed my bathroom mirror? That picture I told myself I would hang 3 months ago? Do you see any pictures hung? Because I don't. My emails are backed up. I have to send packages I haven't put together. In most home and organizational respects, I am not my mother's daughter to her everlasting sadness. But to give credit to her influence, there is this voice inside of me that says, you cannot be happy if your front closet looks like that. You cannot. Also, I got the results of my upper endoscopy back, and I have confirmed celiac disease, and so now I'm trying to figure out how to eat. I'm reading celiac recipe books with meals made simple, and I'm thinking, simple for whom? Basically, the marathon stopped. I caught my breath, took a look around myself, and thought, can I keep running though? Is that an option? What all this has meant is that I've barely been reading. For example, I was more than halfway through Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb. It's 850 pages, but I was more than halfway through at the end of the year. And I'm going to be posting this with 10 days left in January, and I still have 100 pages left. I've actually had 100 pages left for several days now, and I'm struggling to get over the line, partially because I have mixed feelings about how successful this individual book is, but also because I did the calculation of all the books you see behind you there in this series, and it's just shy of 11,000 pages, and I think it's hard for me to accept that in 100 pages it will be over. In the coming weeks, now that my life is resembling a life again, I'm going to be doing a video on this final trilogy, but I'll spend the first part of the video in a no spoilers discussion talking about general feelings now that I've completed the series. And then I'll get into a clearly marked spoiler discussion so that those of us who have read all of Realm of the Elderlings can debrief. My other reading update is that I was walking my sister's puppy last week, and I had one of those New York moments where there were all these books lined up outside somebody's apartment. I guess they were moving. And one of those books was A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki, and I haven't actually owned a physical copy of it for a while. I think I gave it to a friend who never returned it, which rarely happens to me, to be honest. Most of my books do come back to me, but this one didn't. And I suddenly wanted to reread this, which has been interesting for a few reasons. So I'm about 120 pages into this 400-page book, and like I mentioned in my 2021 general reading wrap-up, I didn't reread a single book from cover to cover last year. I refamiliarized myself with certain books, but I didn't have the experience I'm having now. So when I first read A Tale for the Time Being, it was in 2015. It was before I knew the BookTube existed. And this was actually one of the books that contributed to me finding some of the channels that I now still watch all these years later, because I went on YouTube one day after finishing it, and I searched for this book because I wanted to just see if anybody else had read this, if anybody else was talking about it. It was a major factor in my BookTube discovery, And as many of you know, this was and remains a booktube darling. It follows two characters. One is a Japanese teenager named Nao, who actually feels more American because she grew up in California, but then her father's visa was revoked when his business crashed. And so they were sent back to Tokyo, and she's now going to high school in Tokyo and being severely bullied. So she's writing in a diary, and then however many years later, Ruth, our second character, finds her diary washed up onto the shores of the remote Canadian island where she lives. And Ruth, I think, is in her mid-40s. Last time I read this in 2015, I was 22 or 23 years old. I'm one of those mid-year birthdays, so unless I remember the month I read it, I'm never going to know what age I was. But yeah, either 22 or 23. And now I am 29, obviously turning 30 relatively soon. And I mean, 7 years is not that lengthy a time in terms of a reader's rereading life. I mean, many of you will have reread certain books after 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. It is really changing my experience because when I originally read this, I was much closer to Nao's age. I think she's 15. So 22, 23, and 15 versus, let's say, Ruth is 45. And now I'm turning 30 and I'm directly between their ages. And I feel that difference keenly. First of all, I wasn't bullied in high school, but I was very lonely. And I remembered identifying with a lot of aspects of Nao's loneliness. And I guess I had this general, untested, vague idea that self-identification made a feeling stronger. What has happened in this case is that me being much more removed from her age, me being much more an adult in my sense of myself, has made her bullying sections so desperately sad to me. Like, I was sad at the time, of course I was. But there is a different feeling of seeing this happen to a child when you haven't felt like a child for a long time. I have cousins who are 16 and 14. And of course I feel sad when I look back on my own experiences in high school, but it is nothing compared to even the thought of either of the two of them being bullied. Actually, I know that one of them has been bullied, and I can't even explain to you how that makes me feel. And that's kind of what I'm dealing with here. Of course, I'm familiar with the idea of distance making something more poignant, but I didn't think that removal from a situation in this way would actually make it even more impactful. And then poor maligned Ruth. Well, I don't actually know if she's maligned. I have to get to the end of the book to see how I feel about the proportion of her storytelling, because I remember on my first read of this, I found Ruth's sections a real slog. I thought that they were one of the weaknesses of the book, that they were so contemplative. It really took you out of the immediacy of Nao's voice because of the switch from first person to third person, and because Ruth feels very adrift in an adult manner that is different, again, from the immediacy of Nao's sense of being adrift. I'll try to fix this part of my face before I continue speaking. I still have some questions about the proportion of page count that's being allotted to Ruth versus Nao, but much less so. I'm finding Ruth's sections quite interesting now and relevant in a way that I did not when I read this at age 22. Nao is struggling to envision any kind of a life for herself moving forward, whereas Ruth has lived a lot of her life and is now thinking, but is this what I want? And do I even get to decide that it's not? It hits different, as the kids say. I don't actually know if the kids say that. See? Older. And it's not that I necessarily directly identify with Ruth currently, but it's that difference from so clearly being on Nao's wavelength on a first read versus now being directly between the two of them and not feeling pulled necessarily in one direction or the other. I've been casually picking this up and not sure if I wanted to reread it fully until last night when I read a decent chunk of it, and I do feel now that I want to especially see what I'd make of the ending, because even among the people who loved this book, who I think were in the majority at the time, the ending was really polarizing. I had neutral feelings about the ending the first time I read it, so I'm really curious to see what I think now. So it won't have been an especially prolific reading month, and that makes me even happier about my decision to be on a no buy currently. I haven't even really felt the urge to buy any books because, like I said, I just haven't had the time to read recently. But again, I think that if I were in the mindset of looking out for the next book that I buy, I might have been less likely to reread this book. And I've already put in a hold for an ebook copy at the library of Ruth Ozeki's book that came out last year. I think it's called The Book of Form and Emptiness. And it's interesting. There's a line in here from a chant about form and emptiness. And it's cool to notice potentially a point where an author is circling back to something that has kept a hold on them, even as they moved on from the project where that thought originated. We'll see if I end up reading all of the Book of Form and Emptiness, at least at this point through the library. I'm not going to pressure myself to read all of it if I'm not enjoying it. So I'll give it a good 50-page try, I would say. I'm finding it hard to access the version of myself who used to just cycle through books in and out, in and out. Years ago, I remember mentioning the feeling of books being on an assembly line. And it's funny to me now thinking of that as a problem, which it was, and I wouldn't necessarily want to go back to that, but I am having supply chain issues, let's say. I'm happy that I'm able to relax more about having reading months like this one, but at the same time, I would like to have fewer reading months like this one. So we'll see how February goes. One thing I'm trying not to do is to plan my next book. I don't know how many of you do this as well, but for me, I've always had in my mind at least the next book that I would like to pick up. The obvious result of which is me not honoring my reading preferences in the moment that it's time to start that book, because I had already decided at least several days in advance that I was going to. Part of my insistence on continuing this way instead of reframing how I want to read is that I just feel skeptical about the way that people talk about mood reading. Of course, I believe that people are mood readers. I'm a mood reader. Everybody is to a certain extent. But I think mood reading is like a self-identification that's often used to rationalize a lot of kind of irrational things, like when people say, well, I own a lot of books, but it's because I don't know what I'll be in the mood for next. I seriously doubt that anybody amongst us has 250 different moods. Like, however complex we are, we maybe have a palette of 17 different moods we're going to be in. So if you own anywhere between 17 and 34 books, especially ones that you got recently, it's probably going to account for your mood. You know what I mean? But it's irrational on my part to be lumping that in with my own experience of not recognizing my moods at all. And I'm going to experiment with breaking myself of that. I think the first stage is just acknowledgement, and that's the stage I'm in. And then we'll see if I'm actually able to stop planning what I'm going to read next. I'm sitting here speaking to you now about this, and I just had 2 books pop into my head and thought, I could read those next. Those would be good ones. Tell me about your Januaries. Have you been having a good reading month? Have your life circumstances allowed you to have a good book life at the moment? What do you think about rereading? My apologies to any of you who are self-professed mood readers and didn't enjoy my discussion of that at the end. In any case, thanks again, and I'll see you soon for another video.